he had a mantra, and it was doing the right things in the right way at the right time for the right reasons with the right people.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. If you've ever wondered what it looks like to build a veterinary career that blends clinical practice, exotic animal care, industry leadership, and even building new practices from the ground up, this episode is for you. Dr. Micah Kohles joins us today to share his veterinary journey from small town Nebraska to vet med leadership roles that span from practices owner to pet industry. Dr. Micah was the veterinarian as Oxbow was a growing company, and he is currently on the board of directors for the World Pet Association. You'll hear how he turned a love of wildlife into a diverse veterinary career, the truth about working in industry, and why we must keep veterinarians at the table of pet health innovation. Plus, we'll talk about the growing role of exotic pets in practice, different opportunities in the pet industry, and the value of engaging in your local community. It's a very honest, inspiring conversation that reminds us how many ways we can make an impact. So let's get to the conversation with Dr. Micah Kohles. When did you know you were interested in veterinary medicine?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, super impressed with what you're doing. I think you're bringing a voice to veterinary medicine that a lot of us need and don't always know. So I applaud your efforts and you taking the time to put together this podcast and hope it continues to be successful. So, I was kind of a late bloomer, to be honest with you. So I went to the University of Nebraska, thought I wanted to be a human doctor and majored in biology all the way up to, it was towards the end of my second semester, my junior year. And I just kind of had this epiphany. I was an EMT and I was working in the emergency room. And I'm like, man, people, aren't always honest with how they feel. And, they complain a lot and you have to deal with insurance. And I'm like, maybe I don't want to work with humans. And so it was just kind of this pivotal night getting home. And it's like, well, I love medicine. I love science. Wow. I grew up with animals. Let's explore that. So for me, it was really late. I remember applying to vet school. I'm like, list all the hours that you have. And I had like 40 hours and my friends were like 2,000. And I'm like, man, there's no chance. But I couldn't be more fortunate that I made that pivot. And it's just been an amazing journey of a career thus far.
So you said you grew up with animals. So do you mind sharing just a little bit about how you were growing up and your relationship with animals that may have kind of affected your path in the future?
Yeah. And so I'm not totally different, but this is another good example. We had the proverbial dog, we had the proverbial cat, and, they were awesome. I grew up in a great little small town of 100 people called Holland, Nebraska, right outside of Lincoln. It was the kind of town where you left in the morning and you ran around all day with your friends and you got home at 8 o'clock at night, dirty and scraped up, and your mom and dad never worried about you. My connection to animals was not only through our dog and our cat, but it was more connected through the ecosystems and the environment around. And so I was really fortunate. I grew up with fairly hippie-ish parents. And so being ingrained in nature was just part of our lifestyle. It was 3 or 4 nights a week. We were going on a walk out in nature and out in the woods. And I remember my dad, explained to me what feces was. And I'm like, Dad, it's just poop. And he's like, no, it's feces and it's animals. And so it was just all of those little ecosystem discoveries for me that I love the dog and the cat. But for me, it was wildlife, and it was seeing the migrations of waterfowl and the movements of different species, depending on what Mother Nature was doing or what, their behaviors were driving. And so that's really what kind of intrigued me to then pivot to veterinary medicine, and what kind of led me into a zoo and wildlife pathway to start, even though I, again, kind of moved away from that as my career's gone on.
Yeah. So you started to get into the other question that I love to ask, and that is, as you were getting into vet school, did you have an idea of what you might
Yeah.
do afterwards as your career, and did that change at all?
Yeah. So, when I went to vet school, I actually applied. I think the year I applied, I was maybe the third or the fourth alternate. And in those days, Nebraska had a contract with K-State. So only 25 students got in. And I kind of applied with the mindset of, hey, you just aren't ready. You may have the curriculums checked, but you don't have the experience. And I had this amazing 9-month-long West Coast road trip with hiking planned out. And, lo and behold, I think it was the first part of August, I got a letter saying, hey, you're the third or fourth alternate. There's a spot for you. And I had this amazing feeling of exuberance and excitement and like just pure disappointment of like, I had this amazing road trip planned out, but ended up going to K-State, had an amazing experience and really went down there really without any clue where I wanted to do. I wanted to be a veterinarian, I thought. And, early on, I kind of got intrigued with equine medicine. We had a really amazing professor there named Dr. Earl Gahn, who just is one of those just guys that just exudes excitement and passion about what he does. And so I kind of was drawn to that. And then, putting cards on the table, I followed a girl that I kind of liked to wildlife rounds. And I'm like, wow, like raptors and, all kinds of different wildlife species, which kind of brought me back to those roots. And then a gentleman named Dr. Jim Carpenter, he's kind of the godfather of exotic animal medicine for those that are out there. I just really connected with him, and I ended up being a work study for him and did a lot of work for him over the years. And, that really kind of then expanded my interest in zoological and wildlife medicine. And then, didn't want to do an internship or residency, much to his disappointment, which he still reminds me of today. But went to Kenya for 6 weeks in vet school, did some different rotations at different zoos. And then I'm like, man, Zoo World, like everybody wants to go there and the pay's not that great and there's not that many jobs. And so then I'm like, get into private practice, right? Get some experience. So went out to Denver, was at an 8-doctor small animal exotic practice. Great first practice, just the kind of practice where you're a new grad. You think you know what you're doing, but you have no clue. I remember like doing my first cat spay and I'm all nervous, right? And I'm drumming the suspensory ligament, which doesn't exist in a cat. And then bam, there's the ovary. And I'm like, holy beat, right? And my technician's like, what are you worried about? All bleeding stops eventually. And then I'm like, is that good or bad? But I was just in a perfect environment where I got to see exotics with support. We had amazing technicians. And, real quickly, let me get on a soapbox. What veterinary technicians do, or nurses in our profession, is so undervalued and so underspoken about, right? Like there's very few good veterinarians out there that don't have multiple amazing technicians underneath of them. And I wish that section of our profession got more attention, more appreciation, because they really deserve it. I don't know how long you want this conversation to go, but I mean, so then I was in Denver and it was like, man, this is great, but just something was missing. And when we had our first child, moved back to Lincoln and worked at the Lincoln Children's Zoo. And then I had just the amazing opportunity to join a company called Oxbow Animal Health at that stage.
Yeah, no, you linked it for me because I wasn't quite sure how that all linked together. So that was perfect. Yes.
I was at the zoo in Lincoln and in private practice, and I had actually gotten back and gotten a master's in public administration, just thinking I wanted to be a zoo director. And so kind of was going on that pathway and just something kind of felt like it was missing. And I'm like, man, what haven't I tried? Let's try industry. And, Oxbow was a young, emerging, family-owned, entrepreneurial-driven company. John Miller was the owner. I had known his daughter in undergrad, and, he was kind of growing up at that stage in the game. And he's like, hey, we need a vet. And he's like, I don't really know what I need you to do, but I know I need a vet. And so what do I have to lose? And probably one of the most amazing and best decisions I ever made, just because I was able to say, hey, I'm a veterinarian, but I'm going to learn about quality assurance and product development and innovation and marketing. And, that also led me to the pathway of beginning to do a lot of lecturing, a lot of speaking, which is something I knew I had a passion for, but I didn't really know what passion I could do with it. Yeah, it just led to an amazing 20-year run.
Yeah. So, and we connected on this too, because I still remember Oxbow. One, I grew up with rabbits, and so I used a lot of the products,
Yes.
even from a young age. But going into vet school, like I remember we had Oxbow reps come to vet school and talk with our zoo club and stuff like that. So just understanding a little bit more about Oxbow, I'm kind of like, oh, I really haven't stopped to
Yeah.
think more about this company. Did that start in Nebraska?
Yeah.
Okay.
John Miller was a farmer by trade, and he had a passion for growing hay. And he's like, man, hay is becoming a commodity. How do I do something different with something I'm passionate about? Like, I want to do it better than anybody else. And it was right at the time where rabbits and guinea pigs were becoming more of an ingrained part of our families. And that human animal bond was connecting. And veterinarians were like, hey, I got rabbits walking in the door and I don't really know what to feed them. And so John really was at the perfect time of bringing high quality, nutritionally correct products by partnering with veterinarians, because he's a farmer. He's like, I didn't know, but he got the right people on board. And then, it's a little cliche to say, but, he had a mantra, and it was doing the right things in the right way at the right time for the right reasons with the right people. And to his credit, I just had an open house at my brand new vet clinic, and he and his wife, Pat, drove down, surprised me. That's the kind of people they are, but he never wavered from that, and so that's just what allowed Oxbow to become the company that it was. So yeah, it was just an amazing journey to try so many different things that I don't know how else I would have had that opportunity, being able to stay in Nebraska, but yet connect to network of colleagues domestically, internationally. And you know how veterinary medicine is. It's like every person knows another person and they've all got their specialties, but above all, they just mostly love being veterinarians and they love connecting you with other people.
Now, because again, I can relate to about understanding all aspects of the industry side of things, I think is really helpful to have just this robust understanding of all the parts that affect our patient care. And, it comes down to it. Thinking back on having industry roles, and this has been a little bit a while ago, not to make you sound old. That's not what I mean. But I'm curious, the evolution of the veterinary role in industry, how it was perceived. Do you mind commenting on that just a little bit? Because I'm kind of curious your perspective there.
Yeah, I think number one, I think it's a great question. Number two, I think it is ever emerging and emerging at an accelerating pace. When I joined industry, I didn't know anybody. And frankly, I didn't know anything. Right. But I was kind of thrown in as like, hey, build a quality assurance program for us. Like, help us better connect to the vets, which we already were. How do we bring more science to our brand? And so for me, it was just kind of like, hey, I've got great people around. I've got a great marketing guy, a great sales person, and just let's throw stuff on the wall and kind of see what works. And I think that was really successful for Oxbow because we didn't try to sugarcoat it. We didn't try to say, hey, we're going to slap endorsed by veterinarians on the label, but we're not going to, right? If we're going to talk the talk, we're going to walk the walk. And I think for me, that's what differentiated us. And for me, it was even an epiphany. And, my experience with veterinarians and industry probably wasn't that positive because I always felt like, hey, they're walking in the door, they're throwing science at me, and then they're trying to pressure me into selling their drug. Or, this company taught my nutrition class at K-State and gave me free food. And so I recommended that company for 5 years because I didn't know any better. Right. And I'm not saying that's bad. That's good marketing. But I think it gave me a little bit of a jaded perspective of kind of leveraging and taking advantage of the DVM. And so for Oxbow, I had that in the back of my head and I knew what our brand stood for. And for it really allowed me to kind of reallocate how I felt like veterinarians should be framed in the industry. And I think you continue to see the emergence of that, where it's not just a marketing ploy. It's like, hey, we're really going to back our products and we're going to do the research. We're going to validate the efficacy. We're going to stand behind if there's a recall and we're going to try to do things right. Now, I think the consumer has a lot to do with driving that and demanding that, which is good. But I think companies have also realized the power of science is really powerful. And sometimes it's not the short-term transactional play, but if you're really in it for a long-term brand that's really consumer focused and animal centric, that's the right way to do it. So I don't know if I definitively answered your question there, but I think veterinarians continue and need to play more of a pivotal role for companies that are willing to do it the right way and really put the science behind it. Let's be clear. We also live in a world of a lot of private equity and corporatizations where it's like, how do we take advantage of a brand and leverage it and then turn around and, pivot and sell it in a couple of years? That's unfortunately a reality of the market we live in as well. But I'm excited by seeing more brands recognize the power of veterinarians, truly engaging with those veterinarians. And sometimes that's to the point of having a veterinarian on board. Sometimes it's an advisory council or it's an advisory panel or, a group of veterinarians that are kind of as a sounding board or reference place for them. And I applaud companies that are kind of willing to pull back the sheet and say, here's who we are. Help us be better. Help us validate, these claims, because you and I both know you stand in 80 foot of pet food at a pet food aisle. There's a good, huge percentage of that that's just marketing baloney and fluff and whatever else gets the consumer to buy the product. Really the science of what's best for the animal.
Mm-hmm. And that comes to that wonderful role that the veterinarian does have. And I agree that I have seen more and more companies understand the value of the veterinarian. Sometimes they don't fully understand it, but they understand that there is a part there. And then the veterinarian can get in there, whether it's,
Yes.
like you said, whether it's advisory board, because maybe not all companies can afford a full-time
Right.
veterinarian, but we can have some really exciting impact
Yeah.
with collaborating with these industries, because they also bring expertise in certain areas that we don't. But it
True.
is with the combination that makes the magic, and I think can ultimately enhance what we can offer pets in the long run.
Well, and the client education piece is a key component of that. We talk about veterinarians, but again, let's bring up the unsung heroes. Let's bring up the veterinary technicians and veterinary
Yeah.
nurses. And, while I love the engagement you're seeing, it's a little brutal as a practice owner because you're seeing these technicians get pulled in the industry having great jobs and great benefits, which I love for them. But it's like, I still need somebody to work with me in the practice. But, that consumer interface is huge as well. I mean, consumers want more information, and that's a great thing because the more educated they are, the more empowered they are to hopefully make the right decision for their pets. And so I applaud that angle of it too, is like, you're right. Veterinarians may not be, I'm not a nutritionist, right? I'm not out there on the production floor. So it's that commingling of kind of all of those expertise. But for companies that really engage in saying, hey, this is a veterinarian or a veterinary technician, they're trained and educated to think about what's best for the animal and educate the consumer. How do we hybridize that and kind of pull that all in line with the products that we're trying to put into the marketplace?
Yeah, I love this. And I will probably circle back, but I wanted to also highlight the exotic side of things too, because it sounds like you were able to at least continue to have this as a part of your practice and part of your career for a
Yeah.
while. What
Yeah.
have you kind of seen and noticed about the side of exotic care when it comes to veterinary medicine and how it's kind of evolved, especially with specifically your interests?
Yeah, it's a fun topic. I get to talk about that a lot. Not only when I was with Oxbow, now that I'm not with Oxbow, but I'm still in that world. Is like, hey, you're looking at a section of our pet ownership that's really only existed for what, the last 25, 30, 35 years, right? Before that, if you owned a rabbit, you were probably going to eat it or turn it into a hat, right? That's probably because all those were production animals, right, wrong or otherwise. So it's kind of a cool little micro study because the human animal bond with these exotic companion mammals is fairly new compared to dogs and cats. And so what you've seen is this, I want something different. Dogs and cats are fine, right? But I want something unique. But yet we're trying to catch up with nutrition because most of the nutrition research that's out there is in the production world, right? And we're thinking production is big and fat quick. Well, that's not the lifestyle of a companion rabbit sitting on the couch, watching Seinfeld with us. And so you're seeing this emergence of new information around longevity and quality of life that's being driven by the consumer that has this emergent human animal bond. I mean, rabbits are the third most commonly owned pet in the United States. And then rabbits, guinea pigs, all of the exotic companion mammals, ownership numbers are growing at a faster rate than any other category. Now, they're never going to hit the dog and cat numbers, right? But I think that's super cool because A, we get to see different trends. B, it's a whole new opportunity for veterinarians, right? I think the last AVMA study said that only about 18 to 20% of veterinary practices see exotics. Well, you and I both know most of those are dabblers. They don't really want to see them. There's just nowhere else to go. And so when I go talk to vet schools, I'm going to be at Auburn and Tuskegee here in a couple of weeks. Like, I always remind students, like, you don't have to be an exotics expert, but medicine is medicine. And if you can see rabbits and guinea pigs and chinchillas, and then even the whole extra reptiles and avian, that's no different than doing chiropractic or doing orthopedic surgery. It's a specialization. It's a differentiation, right? And, for me, I love fat dogs should need their teeth cleaned, right? Perfect as a veterinary practice owner. I don't mind crabby cats, right? That kind of gets old. So with exotics, you never know what's going to walk in the door, right? So it just diversifies up that day, diversifies up your revenue stream. And for me as a veterinarian, it forced me to stop taking things for granted. I would walk into an exam room. There's a big dog. It's overweight. I do a quick 5-minute exam and I'm out the door. And I remember thinking, like, I didn't do a good physical exam. I didn't get a good history, right? With exotics, if you do that, you're going to miss something, right? So exotics is kind of this check and balance for me as a practitioner to really stay focused on clinical history and, getting a good physical exam and being good at my diagnostics. Plus, they have a rabbit and I'm willing to see their rabbit. Every rabbit owner knows 20 other rabbit owners, and most of them have dogs and cats as well. So it's just a great way to grow your clientele, and it's not going away. People love something different, and we're talking about exotic companion mammals. We talk about reptiles and amphibians. We talk about avian. I've got a couple of good friends that do a large percentage of fish medicine. What? Like koi medicine? Yeah.
Yep.
So it's just, again, a great way to diversify. Medicine is medicine, but it kind of keeps you focused on thinking about what's new, what's different, what's unique, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I did not realize I was an early adopter as a child, that I was an early rabbit pet owner. But no, that is really interesting. We talked a little bit about this in our pre-call, that a lot of people at some point in their veterinary journey said, I wanted to be a zoo vet or
Right.
wildlife or something.
Yeah.
So if it gives you that little bit of opportunity to continue your interest in different species, I think that's really cool to keep you personally engaged in what you do every day. but yeah, a business builder, an opportunity to keep the whole staff encouraged because I know maybe some vet techs would love to be able to do some exotic work. You
Yeah.
got to back to you find a good vet tech that can support you in those exotics is really important.
Yes.
so, so you've done so much. So you've stayed in practice, you're doing exotics, you've worked with Oxbow on and off. You've also done a lot of teaching as well. So what interests you into the education side of thing? I know you did that everything from Oxbow where you went and talked to vet schools and things like that, but then actually working with a university.
Yeah. So, early on at Oxbow, I mean, one of the things when I became a veterinarian is I really learned early on that if you don't engage the client and if you don't take the time to educate them, many times they're going to leave uncertain of what happened or where did their money go? Or I don't really understand what's wrong with my pet, but I just spent $600. Right. And that's frustrating for them and disappointing. And so I learned early on that I have to spend the time to educate. I have to spend the time to talk to them because I want them engaged in the decision. I want them knowing what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and how I'm spending their money. Right. And so then when I joined Oxbow, which was truly all about educating the owner, like, it was easy for me because it's like, if I help the owner understand whether the owner is a pet owner or a veterinarian, if I help them understand what is natural for the animal and how the animal physiologically works, the product they choose to feed is going to be easy. Right. And so I would go into hospitals and veterinary schools and not talk about products, just talk about the animal. And so that was really what worked well for Oxbow. And it wasn't that it was like this concerted decision. It was just kind of this natural evolution of understanding, like if I stay focused on what's right for the animal and I educate the consumer about that, they're going to make probably the right decision at the end of the road anyway. So that was kind of the pathway for me. And for Oxbow, it was just kind of a natural connection. It really just fit with the brand. And it was kind of like, it wasn't like forced. It was just the way that we knew we wanted and needed to do it. And then it fit naturally for me because I love talking to consumers. I love educating. And it was this perfect connection.
So throughout this whole time, were you still in practice?
Yeah. So when I joined Oxbow, I was full time in clinical practice and still taking care of the zoo. But I knew I needed something different. And John Miller was really great because I said to him, like, John, if I'm going to be out lecturing at veterinary schools, right, and I'm going to be in the booth talking about exotics, I got to be doing it, right? Because I remember sitting in lectures with a guy talking about doing this surgery that he probably hasn't done in 10 years. And that never sat well with me. And so John was really good. I said, hey, let's just start with 3 days a week. I'm still going to practice because I want to stay connected. And, all the way up until the point that, we sold Oxbow. And then when I later left Oxbow, I was still practicing, usually only 2 or 3 days a month, but it just really kept me grounded in the reality of what's going on, in the reality of the world and connected to the consumer.
Okay. Now, you also founded several different veterinary hospitals, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I have. Yeah.
You're y It's very hard to go through your, CV because there's so many things that overlap, so
Yeah.
feel free to help me kinda smooth this through.
Yeah. So, as I was practicing while I worked at Oxbow and I was working at a practices or doing relief work, I'm like, kind of why am I working for other people? Like I had a passion for culture building. I had a passion for building teams and engaging people. And I'm like, why don't I just buy a practice? And I remember my wife saying like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you want to do that? And I just said, well, I'm going to keep practicing, eventually at some point in time. I mean, I didn't know at that stage in the game that we were going to sell Oxbow, but I knew eventually I wouldn't be there. So I bought one practice. I had a couple of great partners. And then that turned into 4 practices kind of just on its own. And then there was this pivot point of like, I love my wife. I love my family. Like I can't do all of these things. Let me back up. I can, but I wasn't doing things well, right? It was just constant running, but just not doing things the right way. And so when it was selling out to my partners, but I did buy the one practice in Hickman, which is south of Lincoln, where I grew up. And again, amazing story, just a practice where I was able to bring in people that, when you meet those people during your journey that you're like, I don't know where or how, but at some point in time, I want to work with you again. A couple of people that worked for me worked at my original practice when I moved back from Colorado. And it was like a decade later, I'm like, you're just special. Like you're the person I can trust. When you answer the phone, you could be having the crappiest day in the world and you put on that voice and you make every consumer and client feel like they're your only focus. And so I was just able to pull those people together, which is really nice because when you're out and you're in industry and you're traveling and you're not in the practice every day, they have the right team, right? And so that was that practice. We just moved into our brand new building, which is super exciting, had our open house. So we went from 1,400 square feet to 5,000 square feet in a brand new facility, which is exciting. And just to add more juice to this, to the slushy, I'm going to open another one here south of Lincoln or south of Omaha, because I love connecting with small communities. Veterinary practices are really, they're stakeholders in small communities. And I think there's pros and cons to the corporatization of veterinary medicine. I don't want to say it's all bad, even though we've seen horror stories. I've also seen some corporations do a good job. I think the true innate history and what is the best for veterinary medicine is privately owned practices. And so I want to kind of expand that as far as I possibly can in my local area.
Yeah. I love talking to veterinarians who speak to that, being so ingrained into the community with their practice. And I'll be honest, I don't know much about Nebraska. So do you, you mind sharing a little bit about the community and what you like about it, and maybe some interesting things that you've done that you think maybe would be value adds to other people as they kind of learn how to do this too?
Yeah. I'm born and raised in Nebraska, so I'm a little bit jaded.
Yes.
But I've been super fortunate, like I said, through my career, not only because I had parents that were like, we're going to go explore, but, in veterinary medicine, I was a scabma delicate, so I wanted to get out. And then, after veterinary medicine, I've always been a big believer in organized veterinary medicine, and then Oxbow allowed me. But, you meet all kinds of cool people, but there is something unique to Nebraska, and it is rooted in the human beings that live here. Like it really is. Like, there's the Midwest way of life and there's the Midwest people. And, people talk about it, but man, Megan, I've been all over the world and there's amazing people everywhere. But when you just talk about salt of the earth, hardworking, the general good of all, looking out for other people, doing what's right, kind of back to John Miller's mantra, they're here. I mean, and that's the thing for me, that when I was in Denver, it was great. I got to ski, I got a mountain bike. Just wasn't the same people, lots of good people. And so I love the seasons. I love being outside and, it's just a great place to raise a family. I mean, it's simple to put. And so that's kind of why we ended up back here. My wife's from Iowa, which is not quite as good as Nebraska, but it's pretty close. Hopefully she hears this. But it's just a great place and a lot of good human beings. And again, just looking out for each other and doing things kind of for the right reasons at the right time. So that's why it's always kept me grounded. Again, I'm lucky to go to some amazing places. But coming back here just reminds me that at the end of the day, it's about family, it's about friends, it's about the home you come to. And the older I get, the more I love just coming home and, sitting on the couch, relaxing with family.
Yeah. You mentioned open house. So do you have those kind of things with the community ever? The open houses, any
Yes.
ways you kind of engage?
Yeah, 100%. This was kind of a unique situation because we were moving into a brand new practice. Hickman, the town we're in, is only about 1,500 people. It's a kind of a bedroom community of Lincoln. But what you find, and this is when I describe Hickman, where I grew up, it's this town where in Kohles pulls an old rusted out El Camino, and then there's a brand new Cadillac Escalade. But it's this amazing commingling, and I can say this, of redneck farmer Nebraskans and, Southern Lincoln yuppies, but they commingle and they interact. And it's just this cool blending and hybridization of people that all have the same root passion, and that's the care for their pets. And so that's what I love about that community. Lincoln's a great town, but I love being on the outside where you get a little more of the ag base. One of my veterinarians, I've got two great veterinarians, Dr. Michelle Party, who I graduated from high school with, undergrad and vet school with, which is pretty crazy. And then Dr. Katie Roth, who graduated from Iowa State. She does some equine work. So we just got a really great team and try to stay rooted in the community.
Oh, wow. So, one of the hot topics right now is access to care and getting out into more of the rural areas. Is that something that you see as well? And how do you shape your business model
Yeah.
I mean, you've been successful. You're opening up multiple practices, you're getting newer facilities. How do you kind of address that hot topic?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I think are essential to that. Number one is not get too big for your britches, right? Just because you got a new building and you got all the bells and the whistles doesn't change the fact that you need to serve all consumers. And one of the things that I've always told veterinary students, and I had to learn early on, right? As a young new grad, you make some bad choices, you don't think through things. But what I've always remind people is it's not our job to decide for consumers. It's our job to give them every single option and let them know that we're going to support them whichever direction they choose. And so I've really tried to keep my staff rooted in that, hey, you may have a client walk in and they may be dressed in a way that you're like, they can't afford anything. It's not our job. Our job is to educate them about every option that we can offer them or every option we can give them. I love to refer. I love, to punt is what I say, because if it's a chance for a better experience and a better outcome, everybody wins. But if I'm not giving them every option and letting them know that I'm going to support them in every option, I'm doing them a great big disservice. And I do think that's one thing that is, we've seen prices skyrocket and we've seen that happen. I think that's getting lost. And, imagine being a young family and you take your furry pet in there and it's your furry child and you're like, hey, either spend $5,000 or your animal's going to die. And I hear those conversations all the time, and that's brutal. Like, yeah, that may be gold standard, but you got to talk to them about the other options and educate them and help them to decide. But to kind of circle back to your question, so we serve probably 8 or 10 small communities. And so my goal is just to make sure that they know that we're there and that we try to get to them as best we possibly can. That sometimes that's with hours, sometimes that's with house calls, but then also like Dr. Roth, who I mentioned, she's from an even smaller town called Deschler. They have no veterinary medicine. So this was her idea. She's going to go down there one day a month and she's going to do a little clinic at the fairgrounds. Now, let's be clear. It's not going to be this amazing profit center for us. That's not what I'm after. She wants to engage in that community. She wants to bring those services to that community because there's a need. And at the end of the day, you do those things, it's going to make sense and it's going to figure itself out financially for the practice long-term. Plus, I see her just brimming with pride of being able to go back to her community and serve them. And then that's that whole work-life balance and that engagement piece that we're struggling with in veterinary medicine right now.
Yeah, so glad I asked. I've only been to Omaha, and I'm sure that is not the best representation of the entire state. So,
Yeah, Omaha's a great town, but it's as big city as we can get.
Yeah.
But for those people who haven't been to Nebraska, shame on you, but I'll forgive you. It doesn't look that amazing or that sexy, but there is so much here. And I love the slogan that our tourist committee came up in Nebraska. It's not for everybody, because it's not, but there are places like the Sandhills. If you ever get the chance, the Sandhills of Western Nebraska, like you can stand on these bluffs and look over these natural fed rivers. And, I always joke that it's like, there's probably been 50 people standing here and half of them were Native Americans, right? There's just a natural grounding to it and a history to it that I think gets lost with everybody who lives on the coasts.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to send a bunch of people your way for the next vacation.
Yes, come on down.
Awesome. Well, earlier you mentioned your interest around organizations or organized medicine. And so you have several different organizations you've been a part of. And so do you mind speaking to that? Maybe one that I do definitely want to come back to the WPA, but some of the other ones, the Pet Care Trust Board of Directors, the Pet Advocacy Network, several different ones. Share a little about those.
See, for me, it started in vet school. Like I saw the power of organized veterinary medicine. I saw the power of just organization and structure around wherever your emphasis and your priority were. So like I said, I was fortunate to be elected a SCABMA delegate, really got connected to the AVMA and just saw the power of that voice, right? And so as I moved through my career, I always believed in engaging in groups that were doing and bettering and pushing and evolving sections of our profession. So AVMA is obviously kind of the light bearer for the entire profession. But as you know, and I hope most veterinarians know, there are so many subsets and categories, whether it's the surgeons or the internal medicine, or even for me being the exotics guy, the Association of Exotic Mammal Veterinarians, the Association of Avian Veterinarians, the Reptile Amphibian Association, the Zoo Vets, like these amazing groups of individuals that are ridiculously passionate about what they're doing. And not only are they consolidating around maintaining what's best practice, holding everybody to a standard, because there's always going to be those that are pushing a lower standard and we need to get them out of the way, but also how do we push the evolution of the organization and that profession? So for me, Association of Exotic Mammal Veterinarians was a key one because it was obviously a key partner for Oxbow. And so I was fortunate to get involved there and eventually be president, which mostly has a lot to do with organizing the conference, right? Where veterinarians can, VMX is a great conference. Western State's a great conference, but for those that really want to dial in on a topic, going to a conference like AEMV or AAV really allows them to get into those tracks that are very specific. And, Megan, there's a lot more exotic only practices in the United States than most people realize. And so that's kind of why I wanted to dig into those organizations I felt like I could provide a voice, a perspective And I just love being a part of pushing forward, a part of evolving, a part of kind of challenging the status quo and moving our organization and our profession forward, because there's a lot of threats. There's a lot of challenges, whether it's regulatory or animal welfare organizations who think they're doing what's right, but they're playing on people's, passions and emotions, but not on logic. Like, there's a lot of challenges and threats to veterinary medicine and a lot of misinformation, but consumers buy into it and they get distracted and they get confused. And so that's why I believe so much in organized veterinary medicine, is to continue to push us forward and hold us accountable. I was fortunate to be on the board of veterinary medicine and surgery for the state of Nebraska. We have to hold veterinary medicine to a high degree, because if we don't, we can begin to erode everything that so many of us work so hard for.
And the other thing that I have found too is you start to meet other people that are also passionate about moving things forward and making a difference.
100%.
So, in your working with these different organizations, have you seen that too? Is just networking and surrounding yourself with those individuals?
So many amazing people, right? And, I think for me, I found that invigorating because it made me want to be better. It's like, I think I'm doing okay. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I met Dr. Kim the Marshall, and I met Dr. Doug Mader, and I met Dr. Dan Johnson. I meet all these other people that, like, when I first started, I'm like reading their textbooks, right? I remember this super early lecture. I got invited to speak actually in Tasmania as part of an Australian conference. And I was lecturing on rabbit nutrition. And in the front row with this amazing human being, her name's Dr. Frances Harcourt Brown. She's literally the fairy godmother of rabbit medicine. And I'm standing there, this redneck Nebraskan, about ready to give a lecture. And she wrote the book, and she's sitting in the front row. So, like, I'm trying not to pee my pants as I'm standing there, Megan. And I give this lecture, which is probably fairly average. And she comes up to me afterwards, and she's English, sweetest human being ever. She's like, it was a really nice lecture. Here's a few areas that you might, I would love to give you some more information on. But it was this amazing compassion and support. But what did she also do? She challenged me to be better, So that's what I've just found with so many people as I've gone through this profession. And, even though I'm not currently full-time in industry, so many of these people have become my friends. They've become, people that we may talk veterinary medicine, or we may just talk about what's going on in their lives. And that's a common theme in veterinary medicine as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something we kind of shared as well, is as more veterinarians get into industry roles, a lot of times it may be you're the only veterinarian in that organization, and all the more reasons to get involved so that you have your network and stay in touch on the veterinary side, because no one quite understands it like another veterinarian or even veterinary technician, right?
Right.
But I think that's an additional add. It's like, get involved and make sure that you're keeping those connections to keep
Yeah.
yourself mentally strong.
Yeah. And I think, again, we talk so much about veterinarians. It's veterinary nurses and veterinary technicians, and even that I've gotten more connected in the vet industry and the pet industry. It's just other people in the industry as a whole. Like, we love to give salespeople a hard time, but there's some amazing salespeople that have been in the veterinary industry for years and years and years. And they may not be veterinarians by degree. They're veterinarians by their heart, and they're veterinarians by what they've learned and kind of developed over time. And, some of those people have an amazing journey as well. And, they're part of our profession, even though they don't have the DVM or the VMD or whatever degree behind their name.
And just building that community of understanding. And this is perfect segue, because I did want, like I said, I wanted to come back to the World Pet Association, WPA. And that is there, it's just a whole another world on the pet industry side sometimes. So being able to, in a very open, curious way, ask your sales reps, help me better understand how this works. Like, even if it is like, this part has to be marketing, because we have to, I mean, the product is great, but if the pet owner doesn't buy it, it doesn't ever get into the bowl, right? So
Right.
there's like a whole network of different things that you have to understand. And when you are nice to each other and open and you're communicating, they can give you some light into that side of things,
Yeah.
and they can advocate for you if you have some feedback, for example. I think it's just so important to keep those lines of communication flowing, instead of having this wall of like, that's industry, this is
Right.
veterinary medicine, and we shall not
Yeah.
cross the line, which is really neat when someone mentioned you and that I should interview you, I saw that you were on the board of directors for the WPA. And for those
Yeah.
who aren't uh, knowledgeable about that, that's a really big organization on the pet industry side of things. Do you mind sharing how you got involved and just kind of your experience with being able to kind of straddle both sides?
Yeah. So, being in industry on the pet side, Oxbow was a veterinary endorsed brand, but most of our products were consumer focused and consumer driven, whether it was mass or e-commerce or whatever. Right. And so I was going to Super Zoo and I was going to global and just representing our brand there. And so I quickly saw an opportunity where there's some education going, but not nearly enough. And so, I'm not very shy if you haven't figured that out already. And so I just saw this opportunity where I can bring information. And certainly some of it was like, hey, this is my job at Oxbow, but also there's just a need, right? So many consumers are still feeding muesli mixes and seed-based mixes because they just don't know any different. And so I offered to lecture and got connected with Super Zoo and started lecturing out there at their conference every year. And then I saw the opportunity of like, wow, I'm one of maybe one or two vets that lecture every year. And you walk the Super Zoo trade floor, which is insane. I mean, it makes VMX look small and there's hardly any veterinarians around here. Like, why is there such a disconnect? Like, we're tying to the same consumer. There's a lot of veterinarians that are doing it the right way. There's a lot of pet companies that are trying to do it away. There's certainly some that aren't, right? But yet, why is there such a disconnect? And so that's what made me kind of say, like, how can I, as one guy, I'm not going to fix this problem, but how can I get better connected to the pet industry? And so that's how I kind of started to connect through lecturing, then got it connected with WPA and some early board members there and was fortunate to get appointed and then onto the executive board. And so it's been an amazing journey because it's opened my eyes to the pet industry, which is unique, but yet also very, very different, right? But it's also made it crystal clear that we're not always going to agree and we're not always going to play in the same sandbox, but there is a lot of roadway that we're both living, we're both driving. How do we get better alignment, better support? And so we're starting to do some of those things. You mentioned Pet Care Trust. It's a really, really cool board. Pet Advocacy Network, both organizations that I was fortunate to serve on as part of WPA, but Pet Care Trust has Pets in the Classroom. It's an entire program around how do we get pets into classrooms for children to have that pet interaction. Maybe they don't have it at home, but to help them understand how you care for. Pet Advocacy Network, which is the kind of the lobbying advocacy arm of the pet industry. Like I said, veterinarians are getting beat up by animal welfare. My goodness, the pet industry is getting even more killed by animal welfare, just crazy people that don't get it, right? And so there's so many of those, again, good organizations trying to do the right thing in the right way. And I want to consolidate. We don't need to be doing the same thing in vet and the same thing in pet. And we're not even talking, we're not sharing dollars, we're not sharing ideas. And again, we may not align on everything, but there's a lot of things that we have similar goals and outlines on. Let's at least work together where we can. And man, like we've done a few things, but we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg with the opportunity.
Totally agree. So I just got back from Global and I did get to present on a couple of
Awesome.
different sessions. And the one where I presented at the actual Global Learning Series, it was very well attended. I had a line of people who wanted to talk to me
Yeah,
afterwards. And I don't think this is just because I was a riveting speaker. I think they
for
were
sure.
so excited to see someone with my credentials that were
Yeah,
there. Like, you're a veterinarian, you're a nutritionist, you're talking to us. This is so exciting. Like, they want to talk with us. They want us to be part of it.
100%.
And I think that's so encouraging. I want people to know that. So I'm going to shout it from the rooftop just a little bit because, again, I think we have more of that opportunity, like you said, to work together.
Yeah,
And again, the more that we can work together, we share our different perspectives and our backgrounds, our knowledge, the better we can make things ultimately. Everything from getting better products to educating clients better, because we're
yeah,
all kind of working together for the same goal.
totally. And I've been fortunate to lecture to vets, to vet students, whatever. The veterinarians are a key stakeholder. But what we have to remember is that, technicians and assistants and, groomers, they're all animal health professionals. I just spoke at a conference on groomers in Atlanta, and I love talking to groomers. One, there's going to be more shades of hair color and more tattoos in that room than any other place. But these are people that are just passionate about animals, and they're not sitting in my lecture because they have to. They actually want to learn. And to your point, Megan, it's like, you're a vet and you're willing to come talk to us as groomers. And I'm like, hell yeah, why wouldn't I be? But they're used to kind of getting the cold shoulder, kind of feeling like the redheaded stepchild of the animal health world. But at the end of the day, I always tell them, I see pets once or twice a year. You see them 6 or 8 times a year. Like, you can identify more disease than I am. So let's empower them. Let's educate them. Let's bring them to the table, especially as we continue to get more into this world of telemedicine and the disconnect and owners not wanting to bring their pets into the clinic. We got to get better at getting our hands on them or touching them. And it's not going to just be veterinarians.
Yeah, funny that you said that because I was in one of those learning sessions and they talked about the statistics of where people go to for advice for their pets. And that pet store owner is really riding up in the ranks of where pet owners are going to ask questions about their pets. And so, all the more reasons to build a good line of communication with that audience because they are going to be they already are a very big part of that pet ecosystem.
Yeah.
And the more that we can align, maybe the more that they'll feel comfortable sending them to us, when
Yeah.
we really need it. And like all those things that kind of come with it. And you're right, the people that were coming up to talk to me afterwards, their backgrounds were so diverse. I had the small mom and pop store owner that came up to me, journalist,
Yeah.
people from that were making products that were curious. So, I mean, it's just kind of neat, all the different backgrounds that are really excited to all work together. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it just makes me very excited. And I just want, again, to let the veterinary side know how many opportunities. One, if you feel really strongly about something, in a nice way, go and talk about it. Go meet them
Right.
where they are, ask questions,
Yes.
share your thoughts about it. For those that are wanting side projects to do, go join advisory panels, all these kind of things that can allow you to expand your reach and your interests.
Yeah. Go where they are is something you just said. And I think that's so important. Like, you know, you and I are fortunate to have an amazing degree. And with that degree comes credentials and it comes respect, which just should be earned. But we also shouldn't take advantage of that, right? Like, we need to go where these people are. We need to understand that, like, as a professional, if we want to be leaders of the industry and we want to be out healthcare professionals, we can't just sit in our practices on our chairs and expect everybody to come to us, right? Go to those grooming shops, go to those pet stores and say, hey, I'm a local veterinarian. I'd love to work with you. Can I come in and do a lunch and learn? And if for no other reason, you're going to provide better education. And frankly, because some vets only think this way, it's going to be better for your bottom line eventually as well. And then the pet's going to benefit right in the middle of it. And so that's something I really push my vets to do is get involved in the community, go out and meet with people. And, because there's a lot of people looking for information and either they don't feel comfortable going to the vet or they don't know the power of that relationship. And it just makes us miss opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there anything else that you feel like we kind of missed that you want to kind of wrap up one last time?
We've covered a lot of ground. I mean, I think, one of the things I would say, and this is something that I think we need to pay attention to. I talk to a lot of veterinarians, and one of the things I'm hearing more and more of that is just so disheartening for me is they're like, hey, my kids said they wanted to be a veterinarian. I told them, you don't want to do that. And I'm just, you hear it once or twice and you're like, okay, whatever. Right. But when you're starting to hear it a lot by people that are good veterinarians, it's disheartening to me. And I think, that we have to continue to kind of ask the question of why are vets saying that? And, there's a lot of challenges to veterinary medicine, but we can't stop having great people come into the industry because they're afraid of it or they're uncertain about it. We're continuing to see more and more for-profit veterinary schools, which can be done right, but also leads to a lot of veterinarians that probably shouldn't have gotten into vet school in the first place, graduating with a huge amount of debt, right? But I think we have to continue to challenge the AVMA and other large organizations to continue to dive into what is changing in the culture of veterinary medicine. We're aware of the compassion fatigue and, the just disgusting rates of suicide and the challenges of the work-life balance, and all of those deserve attention. But I think we also have to continue to challenge ourselves to say, how do we continue to be a profession people want to become a part of? And I feel like that's changing a little bit. And that just kind of scares me because far too often when those changes, those patterns begin to emerge, you're kind of already missing a little bit of that tipping point, if that makes sense. And so I really hope that as veterinarians, we continue to ask the question, like, why are good veterinarians saying that? Why are they saying to themselves? Like, I have a 7-year-old little girl and she says she wants to be a vet. And I'm like, it's amazing. I can't wait for you to be a veterinarian. But yet I ask a lot of vets and I hear them say, like, no, don't be a veterinarian. You don't want to do that. I want to make sure that we're attacking that and understanding that, because very quickly that could change the overall ecosystem in not a positive way.
Yeah. Well, so we end really well on that point. What ultimately keeps you engaged? What ultimately keeps you excited about being in veterinary medicine?
It's easy to say it's the pets, but for me, it's probably the people, to be honest with you. And, I don't know that I've really thought about that until you just kind of said it. Like, nothing's better than laying on the floor making out with a golden retriever puppy. Like, don't get me wrong. But to be able to be a part of a pet owner's journey and to be there in a time of need. I remember the first time I euthanized a pet that I had seen as a puppy, and going through that entire life's journey and knowing that that pet owner trusted me and valued my input and relied on me, and that frankly I didn't take advantage of that, right, is such a powerful experience, and it's super emotional, you know what I mean? And so for me, being able to help pet owners have the human animal bond, which there's nothing better, right? Humans are great. We can all be jerks and butt heads. Pets, for the most part, yeah, some cats are butt heads and they're good at it, right? But most pets, all they want is a place to sleep and food and water. I mean, we should all live our lives through the lens of a golden retriever. Like, can you imagine, like, if we acted like golden retrievers and woke up, how much better our world would be? But for me, it's being able to help pet owners, to be able to educate them, to support them, to not make them feel dumb because they don't know, to give them a safe space where they can ask a question and not feel stupid or not be taken advantage of. It's the people, and then it's the people in the industry, because there's just so many good people really, really working hard. And, I want those people to continue to push back on the bad corporations, the corporations that are doing crap for no other reason that they can pretend like they care about the pet owner. They care about the bottom line. And there's more and more of those companies too. And I want to attack them and beat them down, because that's not what we should be doing. We should be putting the pet owner first and then putting the pet in conjunction with the pet owner. That should be our only priority. Sorry, like, give me a podium. That was a little overboard.
No, that's good. And back to what you said, I didn't really think about it until you asked the question.
Yeah.
Sometimes it helps just to check in and say, what am I grateful for? It's like, those moments of why am I still here? And I think that's important. That can help us on an individual level for sure.